What's up, ship chasers? You have been asking for it. Win stat chasing. Well, we are back and we are super excited to keep the tradition going. A couple years ago, Pat Kerrane kicked this off. Last year, Sam Hoppin passed on the baton or continued the baton. And now we have two more of our community members. You guys know these guys. You've seen Sam drafting on stream with us last year, hanging out in the Discord. Of course, Conor, aka Drico, the 2021 Best Ball main event champ and RotoViz contributor here. Two super sharp guys that you guys are in great hands with today. I know some of the stuff they got in store for you guys. I've seen some of the charts. Everything is going to be as good as it has ever been. So Sam and Drico, welcome to the show. Excited to see what you guys have in store for us.
Yeah, thank you very much for asking us to do this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, the people needed it, Sam. And I would say too, I've seen the charts. I feel like you guys haven't missed a beat in what we like to do here on stat chasing.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely got a lot of inspiration from how Pat and Sam Hoppin ran the show in past years, and we're trying to build on it, make it a little different. Obviously, it'll be different with two of us on the show instead of just one person. So, yeah, we're going to run with it, see how it goes, and I'm excited to be kicking this off today.
Yeah, and so obviously we're recording this on Wednesday evening. I think the hope is as we progress and get a little more streamlined that we'll push up the recording time a little bit earlier. I know Pat and Sam would normally record on Tuesdays, but we're going to experiment. We're going to see what works best for these guys. But regardless, we're going to get you all those sweet stats. What can people expect this year, Drico? Because I did give you guys kind of free reins if you had different ways to format it, different things that were interesting to you. Can you give people a teaser here before you guys jump into the meat?
Yeah, for sure. So we're definitely, as Sam said, standing on the shoulders of giants. So we're starting. I guess this week we're going to start off pretty close to what Sam Hoppin did last year, but like Sam Sherman said, we're looking to iterate this week. So I think we talked about this week. It's going to come out after waivers, so we're going to come at it more of an angle of the best ball resurrection and what did we learn in week one, and where is there under reactions, and what's the kind of best spot to attack that. So.
Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great, and I like the idea of, we now have so many options for action. Like initially when this started, I was like, oh, help you with waivers. And then it's, oh, well, this helps you with DFS trends, setting your lineup. Now we have all of these battle royale contests on Underdog and the resurrection, of course, too. So I think anytime you guys can apply this stuff to actionable things that people are participating in, that's definitely a win for the show.
And we had been talking kind of like, oh, and I've done this before where it's like, oh, how do you apply this to trades and stuff like that? But my experience at least has been when you're trying to react to new information by doing trades, it's really hard. There are leagues out there where it's really difficult to actually make trades happen. Whereas this is like, okay, well, you're doing a draft all over again, and like that is to me that's one of the most actionable ways to like actually implement new information.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
All right. I am going to leave you guys to get to the good stuff here. I should also mention, as always, if you guys want to join us in talking about all of this stuff and strategy, the Ship Chasing Discord is a great place to be. We have a great crew in there, and I think in the future too we might even make some of these available live for YouTube members, so we can experiment with that. But I just wanted to introduce you guys all officially to the new co-hosts of Stat Chasing, and I'm going to drop off here and let you guys do the rest.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Sounds good, Pete. Thank you.
See you guys.
Great.
All right, so the handcuffs are not the handcuffs. They're off.
The parents are out of town. It's just the kids now.
The stabilizer wheels are off the bike.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Drico did a good job of giving sort of an overview of what we're going to try to accomplish here. But just to get a little bit into the weeds of how the format of this is going to work, we're going to go through all of the key skill positions in fantasy. So obviously quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and we'll be covering a key set of stats for each of those, often looking at some sort of crosstab of efficiency versus opportunity, and synthesizing some key takeaways from week 1. So yeah, unless you have anything else to add up top, Drico, then why don't we dive into it?
I think you got it.
Okay. Sounds good. So starting at the quarterback position, just to orient people watching this video to the chart, we have TD rate on the y-axis here and adjusted yards per attempt, which takes yards per attempt and adjusts it for interceptions and touchdowns. And we're looking at all the starting quarterbacks in week 1 here. And I guess the other thing to note is the bubble size here indicates rushing yards. So you'll see some of the Jalen Hurts, Mariotas, etc. Pop out for that. So yeah, I guess my question here is, Drico, is there anything on this chart that really jumped out to you? Anywhere where you think we should really be updating our priors on a particular player? Curious your thoughts here.
So yeah, the first thing that I kind of noticed here is that for all the thing of how Russell Wilson kind of like he looked bad on Monday night, that is a pretty high yards per attempt or adjusted yards per attempt. I think it's like 8.1, and like his season of career high is 8.3. So I've heard kind of like discussion of like, hey, does Russell Wilson still have it? But despite not I guess looking aesthetically as good as people are used to, or throwing as many touchdowns as people are used to, I do think it is very interesting that his yards per attempt was still very good.
Yeah, that is interesting, and especially with the way he spread the ball around on Monday night. You didn't really, and we'll get to this later when we go through other positions, but you didn't really see any one player sort of dominate target share there. So it's certainly an interesting offense to watch. I agree with you. I think the general like casual takeaway is, Russ lost to the Seahawks. Like he's done. He doesn't have it anymore. But I am certainly not buying that narrative. I think there was a lot of fluky stuff in the game there with the goal line fumbles, that sort of thing. I'd certainly be looking to buy him.
And one of the concerns about Russell Wilson heading into the season is, okay, so obviously Hackett he's not sharp with the decisions that we saw. One of the concerns was that they were going to run the ball too much, or they might run the ball too much for him to really score a lot of points. But I think let me pull up the exact number, but he had around 45. He had 45 dropbacks in the game. And to me, I get the game was competitive, obviously, but that's definitely plenty of volume for him to be a productive passer.
Yeah, totally agree. And we'll see there. I think like it was, the Denver was forced to throw, but I think the game was still relatively slow, if I remember correctly, with the Seahawks running the ball quite a bit. So we'll see if once Denver sort of gets in fast-paced shootouts, you could really see some big games for Russ and the pass catchers there. Okay, cool. I guess moving on, some more targeted questions. I'm curious what you think about Daniel Jones week 1 in the day ball offense. I think there was a lot of talk this offseason about, could Daniel Jones make the Josh Allen leap? Obviously I think that's an extreme range of outcomes, but
right.
He does show up quite well in this chart. This chart is hiding the fact that he only had 28 attempts. So keep in mind, like they were trying to hide him. It was limited attempts, but on his attempts, he was quite efficient. And his rushing yards also sort of pops out here, which is, a skill he's known to have. Do you have any thoughts on Daniel Jones sort of, more so in a best ball sense than like a, say, main event 1 QB manager?
Right.
But
so my kind of thoughts were, if you remember, he was always a very popular fallback option of, hey, you missed the quarterbacks that you actually wanted to draft. Here's Josh Allen. here's a story that you can tell yourself about the new coach, and he's got the rushing upside, and so you draft him and pray. And if I didn't take him too much, but so maybe there's a bias here for me, but I almost think if the low number of dropbacks that's what a good coach is doing. It's like the good coach is like, okay, well, I've seen what happens when the pressure's on you, and how do I take that off your shoulders? And obviously he's done a solid job here where the efficiency has been there, but the combination of low number of dropbacks and then just how good Saquon Barkley looked, like he was like old Saquon Barkley superstar. And now I'm thinking if that were me, and obviously I'm nowhere, like I'm an idiot, so I'm not in this guy's shoes, but if it were me, I'd be like, okay, Saquon Barkley, superstar running back, shaky quarterback that I can make look good on few attempts. It kind of looks like this is going to be a Saquon Barkley ride him out. Like he's the star player of the offense. Daniel Jones is the game manager.
Yep. I think I largely agree with that take. I think the way I read this is more so this is good for Saquon Barkley that Daniel Jones can competently manage an offense as a game manager, not necessarily exciting for Jones in himself, but at the same time, like, you know, I'm not down on Jones after this. I think it is somewhat interesting that he was efficient in week 1, but again, such a low sample. Like I'm not overreacting too much here. Okay, cool. Maybe let's hit some quick other quick notes at quarterback before we move on to running back. The one other thing I had, and Drico, feel free to share other thoughts you had. I thought the Burrow rushing yards here was interesting. Just because that was something he did flash his rookie year and actually propped up his floor and his ceiling combo quite a bit as a rookie when he wasn't passing super efficiently. I don't know exactly what happened this game, whether it was a result of T. Higgins being injured, sort of forced him to scramble more, whether that O-line was really getting beat up by the Steelers and that forced him to run a bit. I'm not exactly sure.
Quite a bit of pressure.
Yeah. So that's sort of where I guess there, but I think it is promising. He showed he might have a little bit more rushing than he did last year, coming right off that ACL tear. But yeah, that's one thought.
I think that's a great point. Especially when he's shown the upside of being this uber all efficient quarterback. If you can add that to take that and add a pretty solid rushing floor/ceiling, I think that's pretty huge. And we're talking about kind of like how do you implement underdog resurrection stuff, and we were talking about this. The QB5 Jalen Hurts goes in the 4th round. QB1 Josh Allen goes in the 2nd round. Whereas how do you build a great team in this tournament without paying true to nose for quarterback? Well, Joe Burrow, who we know is extremely good, now runs a lot more, and he goes in the 7th round. Like that to me, that's a very attractive spot to go after.
Yeah, I agree. And also if you watch the game, some of his picks were true fluke interceptions, like defensive linemen picking up tip balls at the line of scrimmage. Like he did make some bad plays in that game, but if the market is overreacting to a bad Joe Burrow week 1, I'm totally
right.
buying in
there. I have bad days. You have bad days, right? Everybody has bad days. That doesn't mean that they're no shit.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, cool. Anything here on the quarterback position you want to hit on, Drico, before we move on to running backs?
It's kind of a small thing. But Ryan Tannehill looks a lot better. Or he did look a lot better than he did last year. He looks not quite as good as he was in 19 and 2020. But I do think it's interesting that he played well. And it wasn't on a kind of like short I do think it is interesting that he played well, especially when I will get to it later. that there are some rookies kind of like the target that have been discounted. That the Tennessee quarterback is playing well is definitely interesting, I think.
Agreed. There's some undervalued pass catchers for sure there that we'll get to at wide receiver. Awesome. Okay, let's move on to running back. So for running back here, we are looking at expected fantasy points from PFF. So what you'll see here for those watching on YouTube, on the y-axis, you have receiving expected fantasy points. And then on the x-axis, you have rushing expected fantasy points. So for those who aren't familiar, you can kind of think of it as some kind of formula that translates touches and targets to expected fantasy points. So obviously a rush you get on the 1 yard line is going to be worth more expected fantasy points than a rush you get, at the 40-yard line. That sort of thing is factored in there to that statistic. So as you can see on the chart here, we also broke down the chart into different bands. So in this green area at the top right, that's players with 20 plus expected fantasy points. And then in the yellow region there, it's those sort of middling 10 to 20 expected fantasy points. And then finally, in that red region there, 0 to 10 expected fantasy points. So that's just the simple sum of rushing and receiving. The last thing I'll add to this chart.
I'm a RB guy. 10 to 20 expected points is not middling to me. I'm having a party when I get 10 to 20.
That's true. For my main event teams, I would be happy with like 9 expected fantasy points. And I'm looking at you, Melvin Gordon, Rashad Penny. But actually, they did okay this week.
Where's Tony Pollard on this chart, by the way?
Tony Pollard, who someone on our main event team was begging us to draft Tony Pollard. I think it was Drico. I don't quite remember. He did not do.
Was it me?
Yeah, I don't know. You were in Vegas. You probably don't have a great memory for that sort of thing. But yeah, sorry. The last thing I'll add in this chart is the size of the bubble represents fantasy points over expected. So the larger the bubble, the more efficient the player was. The smaller the bubble. I'm talking to you, Joe Mixon. The less efficient you were. So with that said, Drico, I'll kick it to you again. What is sort of your key takeaways? What things jump out to you from this slide here?
So he is our cover boy. But the thing that jumped out most to me was Antonio Gibson being 20 plus expected fantasy points. So he was a guy who a lot of people, including me, were drafting at the 1-2 turn last year because he'd shown in his rookie year how good he could be as a rusher. We're excited at the prospect that he could add a receiving part to his game. And now to me, to see him actually do that and be reasonably efficient in the receiving game, I think that's very interesting because in fantasy football, when you're targeting and Pat Corain has done a great job breaking this down, when you're targeting these running backs, you want the season breakers, the guys who can crush the season. And one of the most important components of that is 10 expected rushing points and 10 expected points from receiving. And for him to add that to his game, I think is super exciting. Some of the concept are more of the context for that is that this game McKissick only saw 2 targets, Gibson saw 8, and what was also interesting is that it came as Washington were passing more. They were actually above passes over expected, but they did well doing it. So there's there's a question of how well could he sustain that, and that's what I'm trying to tease out a little bit. And to me, the fact that they came out passing, that they prioritized throwing it to him over McKissick, who was supposed to be the receiving back, and we know how good he can be as a rusher. He's gone in the 7th round, and I think probably efficient ADP is 3rd or 4th round. So I think he's a massive value there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I am not as high as you in the third or fourth round, but I agree that he is a buy at the seventh round price. I think I'm still a little worried about how it's going to be split up once Brian Robinson is back, and the latest news seems pretty good for him there. But with that said, at the seventh round price, that's already baking in a lot of that risk, and I don't think with how well Gibson is playing, they're going to be able to completely take him off the field. So I think his floor is still pretty solid there in the seventh round with tons of upside. So I would be buying him up to probably, the late fifth area. And I assume I'll be able to do that because I don't think the market will overreact too much.
Right. I don't think he's not going to go up to the third or fourth round, but I guess I'm more buying into the upside case of we've seen him make these huge plays. Like as an athlete, he's a stud. So to me, that's where I'm kind of like not as worried about him like losing a workload, just because if he's now on the field, I'm kind of like almost projecting him to make those sort of plays just because we've seen it so many times before with him.
Yeah, he's always been good. Like when he's been on the field, we've seen the long explosive plays, the long explosive catches. I'm definitely excited about Antonio Gibson this week. I was buying him when his price started to fall in BBM, but I don't think quite enough. I certainly wish I had more.
Right. I'm feeling light right now.
Yeah. I was taking him at the big discounts, but that was about it. Quickly on this chart, I'm going to zoom into another chart. I think it's worth noting Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, and Javonte Williams all had insane workloads. Javonte's was insane for his receiving workload at over 20 expected receiving fantasy points, which is ridiculous. Almost makes me wonder if I fucked up this chart because it's so ridiculous. And then Taylor and Mixon saw a combination of very heavy rushing workloads with a lot of targets. But I think like people know those guys are studs. I think maybe we can focus on some of the other names in this chart. So I'm going to zoom in to
we pay deference to the expected points gods.
Yeah.
We do have to talk about other players.
Yeah. I agree. If you own any of those guys, you, I think, should certainly be excited. So, Drico, one thing I wanted to talk about, I think there's been a little bit of panic on some high round one, round two running backs. I think the three that people are panicking most about right now are Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. This chart here would suggest that Kamara is the one you should be panicking most about. Do you agree with that, or do you have any other takes on the three of those guys, how we should be thinking about one of them?
So I do think when you're I guess two of the players that we're talking about here are a little bit older.
Yeah.
And those are the players that I guess you have to be most wary about just hitting a cliff, because it's one of those things of like, hey, they're fine, and then boom. With Kamara, it does seem puzzling that his usage is just so low. Like, I guess, do you know if there's like a solid explanation for that? Or
I couldn't figure that out. And I think Mark Ingram played quite a bit, but he doesn't even pop anywhere on this chart. So, I think the narrative that you're going to hear is Jameis is not good for fantasy running backs. That's something we saw in the past in Tampa Bay for some years, where he was propping up Chris Godwin. He was propping up Mike Evans, these massive fantasy years where the running backs, Peyton Barber, Ronald Jones, maybe Doug Martin, who were there with him, were not really producing, especially in the passing game. So there could be sort of a game style clash here between Kamara and Jameis. That's my best explanation. But yeah, I don't know if it's some injury we're not aware of, just weirdness of week one, but the Kamara usage was, shockingly low, especially in a game where they were trailing most of the game, which you'd expect, to be a strong suit from the receiving side. Yeah.
So the thing about so I do see an injury. He had a rib injury.
Okay.
But the one thing that I do think is interesting about Henry is that one of the big things about him was that, hey, he's their bell cow. Like he's the guy who they want to get the ball to. And last year, one of the things that we saw a bit more is that they start throwing the ball more before he got hurt. And I do think it's interesting that Dontrell Hilliard, hope I'm saying that right, got a couple of targets. And that's like, okay, well, now he's definitely, you don't have the out of like, oh, hey, maybe he's going to get targets this year. You really do need him to be the all-world rusher. And I do remember last year he started out kind of sluggish. He started out not being the Derrick Henry that we remember, or at least in performance. And so I don't want to rule out that that's possible, but that he's definitely not getting targets the same way as last year is I think that's a fairly big hit. And
I agree.
I don't really like just hoping that an older running back just has it the same way they used to.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'm a little more optimistic on Henry from the perspective that, hey, they're going to get 2 games against the Jags. They're going to get 2 games against the Texans. He's going to get 35 touches in one of those games and rip off some big runs. Like I think from like a DFS perspective, in games where he's not projected to be highly owned, I still would be chasing that ceiling for Derrick Henry. I still think it's there. That said, a managed sort of redraft league, I think I'll probably be out at whatever his price is, because that pass catching, which propped up both the ceiling and floor there, that seems to have largely dropped out. But yeah, I'm not full panic mode if you drafted Derrick Henry, but it wasn't a great week 1.
Right. Obviously, you're not cutting them.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're in a 4-team league, maybe you're cutting Derrick Henry. Okay. Other things on running back before we move on that I wanted to point out. I thought a couple committee situations were interesting. You got the Bears, where if you see in this chart here in the yellow zone here, you have both Khalil Herbert and David Montgomery quite close to each other. Herbert actually a bigger rushing workload, with Montgomery a bigger receiving workload. I think that is quite interesting if you were to project Herbert for more of a rushing workload than Montgomery in week 1. I don't think anybody was doing that. I also want to point out the Eagles are interesting in that both Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell were getting close to that 15 expected point range. I was buying a lot of them this offseason because I thought it was going to be good offense. I wasn't sure which back was going to be producing, but if their offense rolls like that, I think both of those guys are looking like very solid values with upside if one of them were to go down. But yeah, that's just 2 situations I wanted to point out where both backs are quite close in expected point usage, maybe in an unexpected way. Yeah. Any thoughts there, Drico, or any other things that jumped out to you on some of these guys?
So I do tend to agree with you there. The Eagles running backs are definitely ideal later round targets. One thing that I do think is interesting is that both Breece Hall and Michael Carter were close to 15 expected receiving points, which is fairly bananas. So let me pull up some.
That's nuts. I mean, and not to interrupt you, we sort of saw this last year with the Mike White and Joe Flacco games, if you remember.
Right.
Russ Wilson went down, these running backs, and also Elijah Moore started to see this insane usage. So yeah, continue with what you're gonna say.
So Joe Flacco, he had 62 dropbacks against the Ravens, and it does very much seem like he is the reincarnate of Alex Smith. Probably not as good though, but is just going to heavily target these running backs. Obviously, a lot of the passing attempts are just because the Ravens are so good, but I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Jets to be bad again and in negative game scripts. And as long as the quarterback is not Zach Wilson, and either Joe Flacco or the Mike White, who was the guy last year, the receiving does look pretty good there for both of them. I don't think it's probably not going to be enough to really take Breece Hall home. But Michael Carter, it looks very, very nice.
Yeah, you're loving Carter when you got him around pick 130, 140 this offseason. He's up at around pick 100 in the Best Ball Resurrection right now. I think that's fair. I think I would still be buying there.
Right.
But I'm not enthused.
It's not a priority
with that price. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. The Jets are going to be bad. They're going to be throwing a lot. He's got a pretty large role in this offense. You know, as long as Joe Flacco's in there, I'm pretty excited about Michael Carter. Once Zach Wilson is back, we will see. Last thing I wanted to point out, couple dead zone. In this red region here, we have a mix of some sort of classic dead zone guys. We got Josh Jacobs and Zeke Elliott in there. And then we also got a lot of sort of the sexier zero RB pricey targets being Devin Singletary, Ramondre, Rachaad White, Tony Pollard. None of them, Damian Pierce, you could throw in that bucket too. None of them had strong week ones. Is there anybody among that group that you are still excited about in sort of like either the zero RB darling or dead zone?
I'm still very interested in Devin Singletary. And maybe this is a tape grinder take, but I just thought he looked so much better than all the other running backs in week one. So maybe, obviously it's frustrating to see Zach Wilson. I think he caught 8 targets. That is very frustrating, but the fact that he didn't play very well with it, makes me still interested in Singletary just as a guy who can get the role for himself, just being being so much better than the other players. And another point there is that it is kind of nice to see Eno Benjamin get for his price get what looks like I mean, it's not great, but a solid kind of role that could expand as the season goes on.
Yep. Yeah, I think Eno and Rachaad White, there was some uncertainty if they were going to be the clear number 2s. I think it's pretty clear they both are. I think even some of that stuff, to be honest, was propped up a little bit by the garbage time. He got a lot of work when the Cardinals were getting completely blown out, but it's still good to see him being on the field over Darrell Williams. Darrell Williams had 0 snaps. So if you drafted Eno, you got what you paid for and a little bit more, I think. Cool. So yeah, I think that covers a lot on the running backs. Why don't we move on to wide receiver? Unless any last thoughts, Drico? Or
no, I'm good.
Okay. Cool. So on the wide receiver side, let me describe the graphic here. On the y-axis, we're measuring catch rate, pretty straightforward. On the x-axis, we're showing weighted targets per route run. So what that is targets per route run, but weighted with air yards. So target 100, 50 yards down the field is worth more than a screen target. That's basically factors that in. Again, these are from PFF. And then the bubble size here is showing yards after catch. So you'll see some of the yak monsters like AJ Brown and Deebo Samuel, in theory pop here. But again, this is 1 week of data. So I do especially want to emphasize that with the wide receivers, that 1 week of data is extremely noisy, but I still think we can get some interesting takeaways from it. But it's by no means sort of the definitive truth on any of these guys. This is one week of data. Last thing before I kick it to Drico, this chart here, we're going to break this down into 3 charts because there are a lot of wide receivers. We're just going to be talking about wide receivers who ran more than 90% of routes on their quarterbacks dropbacks on this chart here. And then we have 2 more with wide receivers running 75 to 90%. And then sort of the fringe rotational wide receivers running 35 to 75%. So we're going to be sort of breaking it down to those 3 categories there. So Drico, for these, wide receivers who are basically running all the routes.
Right. I mean, if you make it on this chart, congratulations, you're a full-time NFL receiver.
You can still be running wind sprints as a full-time NFL wide receiver. You can just ask Matt Collins about that. But still, congrats to you. You are on the field. Drico, anything here that jumps out to you? Maybe a guy whose role looks better than we thought going into the season?
So one thing that I do think is interesting is I see DK Metcalf. He's on the above 90% routes run chart, and then his teammate Tyler Lockett is on the next chart. And I guess the reason I think that's interesting is because normally week 1 is when the kind of older players are at the peak of their powers. Like that's normally when they can play the most amount of snaps and be the most competitive, whereas it's later in the season when those younger players can kind of like separate from not from like, I'm not saying that DK Metcalf is like some rookie, but he's younger. You would hope him to not fade down the stretch like an older player. I do think like obviously the quarterback situation isn't ideal, but he had some solid like 24 and without weighting it for air yards. He had 24% targets per route run. He had and then he's also going in the 6th round. So I do think for a player of that kind of caliber who is really kind of like starting to show themselves to be the number 1 wide receiver on their team, I do think that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you there on Metcalf. I was not on him a bunch in the offseason. I think that was probably not the best take. I also think Geno wasn't great. Like no one's going to confuse Geno Smith as some all-star, all-pro quarterback, but he is going to keep the offense competent, I believe. He showed that last year. He showed that again last night. He's not going to be throwing down the field, making, dramatic, huge plays, but he can move the sticks. He can get the ball to DK Metcalf. I think he can get it to Lockett a little bit. And we know with Metcalf, he can take a slant and take it to the house at any time. He doesn't even need a great quarterback to do that. He has that huge yak ability. So in the 6th round, I think Metcalf is a massive buy. I am with you there. One guy I wanted to point out on this chart was Christian Kirk. And let me quickly check where he's going.
I got it for you. ADP of around 60.
ADP of around 60. Okay, that is interesting. So the market has reacted aggressively there to Kirk. I think I'm okay with that ADP. I thought it was going to be lower than that. He's not a priority target there, but I do think if you drafted Kirk this offseason, he had a great role week 1. In Arizona, he was oftentimes running out of the slot and not running greater than 90% of routes, if I remember correctly. So it's, they paid him like a true number 1 wide receiver. That was his role in week 1. We'll see if Trevor Lawrence can play a little bit better and sort of, keep everybody afloat in this offense. But I'm certainly excited if I own Christian Kirk. Again, back to the ADP. I think 60, ADP of 60 sort of bakes in that correction.
Right. The market agrees with you.
Yeah, I think the market is appropriately reacted there. Yeah. And Drico, any guys you're panicking on after week one? There's some scary names in some bad areas in this list, like Devonta Smith, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Williams had a pretty awful week. George Pickens and Allen Robinson were both running wind sprints. I guess to make the question more concrete, which of these players that had a bad week are you most nervous about relative to the price you paid?
The two players I'd be most nervous about if I had drafted them would be Allen Robinson, by far. It was just somebody, it looked like he just really struggled to get open. And he wasn't getting targeted. So that would very much concern me, especially because it comes on the tail of just a ridiculously bad season last year. So I think that's kind of like compounded evidence that, hey, this guy may have fallen off the cliff, unfortunately. The other thing that I guess is a little bit worrying for CeeDee Lamb is that even though he was getting the targets, and receiving efficiency can be so volatile, but it didn't look good about how not open he was. The drops, like there was plays where he tried to beat someone on a slant and he got the ball quick, but the cornerback was right there. Batted it right down, and at cost, that's worrying.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. I was on this take early in the offseason.
You were the grandfather of the CeeDee Lamb is overrated take.
Yeah. I was having some fun with the slander in the ship chasing Discord after the game. Fancy Hunter Renfrow again showed his true colors this week. But yeah, I don't know. I was on it all off season. I was buying CeeDee Lamb last year when he was going in the third round. Then he doesn't have that great a year, and the market's like, you know what? He should be a late first, early second round pick now. Even when people are making the argument that there's no target competition, but last year, even when Michael Gallup was injured, they had the corpse of Amari Cooper, who apparently wasn't worth more than a fifth round pick. And a bunch of other, Noah Brown, Cedric Wilson running routes. In that situation, even when Gallup was out, CD couldn't get it done. And I think there were games in there where Cooper missed time. So anyways, done with my CeeDee Lamb rant, but I think that price was clearly bad. I think his role is still going to be good enough that you're going to be starting him. He's going to have his weeks.
You're not dropping him.
Yeah, when you picked him over, guys who are proven they're good at football, Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, T. Higgins, even, Michael Pittman, to be honest, flashed a little bit more. Yeah, you're going to be disappointed.
Before we move on, one thing that I do want to point out. So we've got this kind of section in the chart. Upper right, we've got Justin Jefferson, we've got AJ Brown, we've got Cooper Kupp, Javonte, and then we have Amon Ra-St. Brown. Look, I mean, if you took away the names from it, you're like, oh yeah, that guy must be a stud. And one of the, I guess, concerns for him was, oh hey, they've got bringing all these guys back from injury. They're bringing these guys in from free agency. They drafted this guy. How's he going to repeat with all this extra target competition? And he's like, he's I don't know if he's as high, but that's some great target earning ability there. And there's another player where the market has reacted. So his ADP on Underdog is now 40. But it's you've basically got an emerging second year player who crushed it at the end of last year, and he crushed it in terms of the underlying metrics, crushed it in the first game. I do think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I would be buying him at 40 still. I mean, he was one of my highest owned players this offseason. The argument that the target competition argument last year. I mean, when a guy's earning 30% target share week over week, I don't care who he's competing for targets with. You're good at football if you can do that.
Right.
And I agree. Like he's up there with the stud first round wide receivers in this chart. And I think, at a 4th round price, there's still certainly upside baked in. I think this chart's super interesting. I'm quickly going to hit on just to list off some names for the audio listeners of guys that had stronger roles than expected and who you should feel pretty solid about at cost. I think Robbie Anderson, Zay Jones, Brandin Cooks, Donovan Peoples-Jones, DJ Chark, all kind of, well, there's a range of ADPs for those guys, but mostly later round picks that had quite solid roles week 1 and at their cost, at least before the season. I think you should be feeling pretty good about those picks. But yeah, let's move on to sort of the 75 to 90% routes run guys. So there's still some stars in here, but guys who, for whatever reason, are running a little bit less routes on their team. Drico, there's some interesting names here. Curtis Samuel, Juju, Drake London. Any of sort of the overperformers or strong performers here that you're particularly excited about after their week 1?
So I've got some notes, but I know you have a strong Curtis Samuel take, so I want to hear it.
Yeah, the Curtis Samuel take. So before I go all out on this take, do you have his underdog ADP right now? Because I don't want to.
He's going in the 3rd round, bud.
He's going up pick 135. Okay, I can still be excited about that. My Curtis Samuel pick, it's pretty simple. Look, like he flashed an insane role week 1. He had 11 targets and 4 carries, clearly out-targeted Jahan Dotson, clearly out-targeted Terry McLaurin on less snaps than both of those players. And look, it was the Jags defense. Like, it could be by the end of the season, we could be looking back on this like, Sammy Watkins week 1s in past year. But Curtis Samuel has showed he's a good NFL player in years past, maybe not an all-star, but to immediately come out of that gate with that big of a role, with a little bit of an interesting sort of rushing Deebo Samuel-esque floor along with that. I think my take is that people hate Curtis Samuel because he's burned them in past years. He's got a long injury history. They see him as injury prone. They're not going to adjust fast enough on his week 1 role. And at an ADP of 135, I mean, like he just needs like 2 more of those games to pay off that price. And I think he's a talented guy. I'm a Curtis Samuel. I'm a believer in the talent, and I think the role was there. So I'm buying as long as people are still hesitant.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense for sure. And I guess my biggest reaction when I saw this was how good how good Tyreek Hill. I was almost about to throw a bone to Gretsch there, but not today. Tyreek Hill, like he put up some elite receiving numbers on Sunday. Like he had a close to 40% target share, over 100. I think it was like 110 air yards, and this is a game where the Dolphins were actually leading for quite a bit of it, and so I wrote an article early in the offseason of Tyreek. He propped up Alex Smith. Alex Smith had elite numbers when he was trying to Tyreek Hill. Some of the concerns with the Dolphins was that they were going to be this kind of rush to win team, but the acquisitions that they made didn't really look like that either. So they got Tyreek Hill. Chase Edmonds was the running back that they paid, and so I think that if you have been drafting Tyreek Hill, super encouraging. He's still going at the 2-3 turn, and obviously you got some monsters who were going there in AJ Brown, I guess T. Higgins didn't show up last week, but some monsters to contend with. But I do think that's very, very strong, and I think really encouraging.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I was the Dolphins Patriots game. I'm a Patriots fan, so I watched that game, and man, he was wide open on every single play. And it wasn't those long plays down the field that you saw with Patrick Mahomes. It was a lot more of sort of quick slants, out routes, sort of 5 to 10
He still had 110 air yards.
Oh yeah. I wasn't spinning that as
110 air yards.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to spin that as a negative. I was just saying.
No.
Yeah. I totally agree. But he was wide open on every single play. It was so easy for them to get the ball to Tyreek Hill in this game. And I think with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill on the field at the same time, a defense can't just put all their attention to Tyreek. You saw it in the game where Jalen Waddle took one to the house when the attention was sort of off him a little bit. So I think I wasn't buying Tyreek much, to be honest, as late second round price. I wish I was a little bit more, mixing him in there instead of some other guys, because I think he's going to have a huge year with this usage. Cool. Another guy, I gotta mention Julio here. I was drafting him a ton this offseason, especially before he signed. I think he looked.
He wasn't practicing either.
Today he wasn't. I saw he wasn't practicing today. If you look at the Bucs practice report today, they literally had 0 wide receivers practicing. I'm guessing it's Scotty Miller and Rachaad Perryman in 2 wide receiver sets this week. But assuming it's just a veteran rest day for Julio,
right?
His ADP is 99 right now. I think that is still insanely low, and maybe I'm still chasing the ghost of the old Julio, but give me Tom Brady's number 2 wide receiver, at least for the time being. I think Godwin misses some time with this hamstring injury. Give me Tom Brady's number 2 wide receiver on a pass-happy offense, who they were clearly scheming looks for in this game. They gave him 2 carries, kind of weird usage for Julio, but they did give him 2 carries. They were looking to get him the ball early and often, and narrowly missed him on a few deep throws that really would have boosted his overall stat line. His usage here doesn't pop out as amazing, but I think it was quite a strong sign in week 1 for Julio to be this involved, and I'm still buying at 99. Curious what you think. I feel like we maybe disagree here.
Just I guess a quick plug for what I've been doing at RotoViz. So I've been writing about the daily slates on Underdog, and Julio Jones in drafts where there's 36 players, only 36 players been drafted. His ADP is 35.4, so very rarely getting drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And if thinking about ways to bet on Julio Jones, that could pay off massively.
Mm-hmm.
If he's getting these deep targets, and you just need a couple of them to hit, they're looking for ways to get him involved. And like I said, he's rarely being drafted. I think that's like a strong, hey, this is how you get paid in fantasy football kind of bet.
Yeah, that's smart. I think that's a great strategy in general in that type of game where you should be going way out of the box. Those are weekly contests. Am I right?
Yeah.
It's
like DFS, but you do a draft instead of a salary game, and it just I think it's fun in that you get if you've been drafting all summer, you've developed drafting skills, and so you get to push them in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just kind of like lineup building. Like you get to build like a uniqueness edge just by being a skilled drafter.
Got it. That totally makes sense. Yeah, and I am looking to go for probably my last 2 picks in that format. I'm looking to take guys that are not being drafted because 36 players, there's plenty of guys in sort of, the 80 to 120 range in your typical ADP that can pop off for big weeks. So I'm going out of the box there for sure. One last note I want to point out here, Stefon Diggs just ran a route on 79% of dropbacks. I'm not overly concerned about this, but I do want to see if this holds in the next few weeks. That's not something we saw a lot in past years. I don't know if it's some minor injury that we didn't know about, whether they just kind of want to rest him more. take him off the field, in areas where they might be, doing play action and drawing up run looks there. But I just wanted to note that. But anyways, let's move on to the next slide here and just quickly, I think we can go through this quickly, Drico. Who is one guy in the rotational wide receiver range, guys that are running 35 to 75% of routes that you think is exciting and could earn a bigger role down the stretch?
So I thought you were going to give me your Kyle Phillips take, but so we touched on it earlier. Ryan Tannehill playing well. Treylon Burks getting just huge target share, targets per route run, flashing pretty good ability with it. Is super exciting. Because one of the concerns about Burks was that he was barely going to see the field week one. He's going to be in the doghouse, and I guess obviously he was more rotational, but he played so well that it's a big question of like how long before they just have to make him a full-time player. He was so good in college, so exciting. Obviously, He went in the first round, so I don't think this is like a hidden take. It's not like I'm the only person with this opinion. But at an ADP of 100, I think that's a big underreaction to the market on just how good he played and looked.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Just to give more context, so this is showing all players with 35 to 75% of routes run. Obviously, that's a huge range. There's a big difference between 35% and 75%. For these two guys, Burks ran a route on 37% of dropbacks, and Phillips ran a route on 60% of dropbacks. So though they appear in the same chart, Phillips, I will point out, was clearly ahead of Burks. Now, do I think he should be valued ahead of Burks? Definitely not. But do I think Phillips is a value at a 200 ADP on Underdog right now? I certainly do. Like, this is, if you have all the wide receivers on one chart, Kyle Phillips actually had the highest weighted targets per route run, not just amongst these rotational wide receivers, but any wide receiver in the league in week one. And I know I'm not a, dynasty scouting expert. I do know some guys like JJ Zacharyson, some of the Roto Underworld guys were high on Kyle Phillips production in college. So I know he's a 5th round pick. I don't want to get too excited, but I think if you, put a more exciting name there instead of Kyle Phillips, which is probably one of the most boring names.
He's a Moneyball guy.
Yeah.
Show me his defect.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say his defect out loud, but
yeah. But yeah, ADP of 200. I mean, that's a joke. He's pushing Nick. If Burks gets a bigger role, Phillips, it's not coming at the expense of Phillips. I think they can both earn bigger roles and get these guys like Nick Westbrook-Akine off the field. That's my take on the Titans. I think I'm buying both of these rookies like pretty heavily.
But yeah, he also he played well. He had 3.1 yards per route run. His air yards weren't bad.
No.
So at cost, the types of dirty, disgusting wide receivers I've drafted in the 200 range, you can do a whole lot worse.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have shares of N'Keal Harry in the.
How far would you draft him up to?
I would take him up to 150 ADP. To be honest, I gotta get more familiar of these resurrection streets, but I see no reason to look. He's a wide receiver prospect that some were excited by. Flashed a huge target earning potential week one in a limited role. I'm definitely buying that guy. If he stays at ADP of 200, I'd have 100% of Kyle Phillips. I don't think he will, so I'll have to temper that, but I'm certainly excited. Cool. So Drico, any quick, maybe one or two quick hits here if you have any. Otherwise, let's move on to tight ends.
I guess it was nice to see Garrett Wilson show out with that kind of 40% weighted target per or 0.4 weighted target per route run. another rookie who's gone discounted, who could very easily earn himself a full-time role very quickly.
Yeah. And one last note I have, I think the DeAndre Carter, Josh Palmer situation is interesting to monitor, especially with Keenan Allen potentially out. I think the market heavily views Palmer as a favorite to Carter there. But they didn't play that different of snaps in week one, and Carter was more effective. So if the market is going all in on Palmer, say in like that Thursday night showdown slate, I'm pretty interested in Carter. We'll sort of see how the ownership looks there. But let's finish off wide receivers and move on to tight ends for the last segment. This chart here for those watching is a little bit simpler. We really want to know for tight ends, look, are they on the field? And when they're on the field, are they running pass routes or are they pass blocking? So that's what this chart shows. And it's ordered from tight ends with the highest pass route percentage, which is Mark Andrews at around 90%, down and going down from there. So this chart shows guys with at least 60% of routes run, ranges from guys like Mark Andrews and Dallas Goedert and Kyle Pitts to guys like Gerald Everett, David Njoku, rest in peace, and Cole Kmet.
Just if I can add as well, the reason that we're looking at it like this too, is that tight end is so much about scheme. Like, it's like you said, does the offense actually use their tight end in a passing game? So, like you said, are you running a route or are you pass blocking? And then do these tight ends earn targets? Which you've got in the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. So we got the weighted targets per route run again in the bottom. So again, I wouldn't look too much into that for a 1 week sample. Obviously, that's an important stat over the course of the year. I think there's some signal there in 1 week, but I would honestly be more interested in the pass route percentage. Obviously, you want to see the combination of both, right? Trick,
right.
I don't know if you feel
it's
about
like you said, we see Pat Freiermuth, his number is higher than Travis Kelce, but that doesn't mean that we think that Pat Freiermuth is a better player than Travis Kelce. But it does mean we're very encouraged by Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah, agreed. I'll give a couple quick takeaways here, Drico, and then I'll kick it to you. I think takeaway number one for me is I think some people are panicking a little bit on Mark Andrews. I don't know if the market's reacting that way. I just saw that on Twitter, but I am not worried at all. He's still got a massive, massive role, the biggest of any tight end in the league right now. I think that's going to continue. There's no sort of Isaiah likely factor here that's impacting Mark Andrews. I am buying him if his price falls. Couple other quick hits. I think Juwan Johnson and Tyler Conklin being on this chart is quite interesting. I think the Taysom Hill tight end role is maybe a little exaggerated. He has more of a gimmick role. Juwan Johnson looks like he has a legit role in this offense. So for tight end premium, I am interested in some low bids for him. Tyler Conklin, likewise, he's probably more likely to have been drafted, but those are a couple guys that I want to point out for waiver purposes. Although I guess the show is coming out after most waivers have cleared, so maybe not the most relevant, but for DFS, I think punt Juwan Johnson play. Maybe people are on that, but I think that's interesting. Trico, I'll kick it to you for your thoughts here.
So I have seen some concern on Kyle Pitts that he's pass blocking a lot. So it obviously is not great. We thought that he would be a lot closer to 100% of pass route guy.
Mm-hmm. And just for the audio listeners, he's at about high 70s pass route rate. Just wanted to
close to 80.
Yeah.
But close to 80 is still quite good for tight end.
Mm-hmm.
Still nice to see that he got heavily targeted. And with fantasy football, you can't lose sight of the talent. Like, this is one of the most talented players in the NFL. I'm still very interested in Kyle Pitts. We saw that there were some people drafting in the first round in the main event. That obviously doesn't look great anymore. But if you can get this guy in the third round or the third or fourth, 3 or 4 turn, that's like a super strong pick. I'm still like a strong believer in Pitts. What else? Next to him, there was obviously a lot of noise about the snap rate for Alberto, but seeing him up there close to the 80% snap rate with a solid 27% or weighted target per route run.
Oh yeah, I love that.
I think that's still very interesting. Really interesting to see TJ Hawkinson. Really hot. I think he's just below 80 as well. Pretty high. Yeah. He had a 41% weighted target per route run, and at cost. So let me see where he at cost of pick 93.6. That's super interesting.
Yep. I think that is at his deflated cost. I'm totally okay with TJ Hawkinson there. Final notes maybe here. Tyler Higbee also an amazing for sort of like the middle round tight ends. Tyler Higbee had an amazing role. Cameron Brate also, his role is stronger than expected. There was not much Kyle Rudolph stuff going on. He was close to 80% routes run. So maybe if you buy into the wide receiver core being banged up there, you can profit a bit with Cameron Brate. But yeah, Drico, let's wrap this up. Probably the least sexy chart we have here. This is the tight ends.
Backup tight ends.
If you have any if you wanted a podcast for backup tight end takes, you have come to the right place. There's some names on here. Frankly, I could not tell you what team they're on. Drico, Parker Hesse. Any idea?
Let's give them the quick hitters. So you see, Jonnu Smith, 41% weighted target per out run. Looks like he ran a route on less than 60% of the pass routes or the pass attempts. You see such a high target rate. You see Hunter Henry, he had a super high pass route rate, but a really low target rate. And that's something that's really interesting. Of like, can he flip him by the end of the year? I think that's a really interesting angle to look at that.
Yep, I agree with that. 1-2 other quick hitters, maybe. I think the Robert Tonyan stuff is interesting. He did not have a high pass route, but he did get targets when he was on the field. I think they're probably bringing him along slowly post ACL tear. And with that wide open wide receiver room, I am interested in Tonyan in deeper formats. That's about all the gross tight end takes I can sum up here. Anything else here, Drico? Otherwise, we'll wrap this up.
No, I think we ought to close it there.
Yeah, once you're talking about Robert Tonyan, it's time to end the show. But anyways, thanks a lot for joining us, guys. We will be iterating on this as the season goes along, and figuring out sort of what works best for us, what works best for you all. So expect some of the charts to change slightly, but this is the general idea. We'll go through each position and highlight the key stats and hopefully give you guys actionable takeaways for best ball, for DFS, for waivers. We're out here to help you better run all parts of your fantasy games. So Drico, maybe tell the people where they can find your work before we shut things down.
Hit up RotoViz. If you're watching Stat Chasing, you're probably familiar. Had a lot of people come up to me in Vegas saying they enjoy my work, which is really encouraging. But thanks if you've made it this far. Thanks for listening through our backup tight end takes.
Thank you. All right. I'll see you next week, everybody.